era which is looking more and more like the Cold War, with the two opposing blocs of the United States and Russia. India is setting the global agenda, namely the push for cooperation and resolution. The G20 foreign ministers meet was unable to reach a joint communique due to the war in Ukraine, but for the first time since the war, both Russia and the United States came face to face. India has called for a return to peace via dialogue and diplomacy, but Russia and the United States have drawn the line in the sand. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken appealed to Russia to rejoin the START treaty to limit nuclear weapons, but made it clear it will defend Ukraine till Russia ends the war of aggression. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, however, said the West wants Russia to suffer to achieve its goal of global domination. But India's ability to get the two sides face to face has spurred more nations to appeal to India to use its ties with Russia and the United States and play the peacemaker. Remember, India also addressed the standoff at the LAC during the meeting between S. Jaishankar and his Chinese counterpart, asserting that dialogue is the only solution. Beyond G20, India also led the Indo-Pacific agenda at the meeting of the Quad nations. All nations called for robust cooperation for humanitarian assistance and disaster relief and took a united stand against terror and violent extremism in all forms. The joint statement also reaffirmed the Quad's commitment to supporting free and open trade in the Indo-Pacific. On the Ukraine matter, the Quad foreign ministers said the nuclear option can never be entertained. The big question we ask: has India revamped its role as a global force of cooperation and consensus on the most pressing matters facing us today? In an increasingly polarized world, what more can and should the world expect from India?
On the bulk of the issues, we were able to get an outcome document. There was a chair summary because there were differences on the Ukraine issue which we could not reconcile between various parties who held differing positions. Now, is the conflict impacting the global south? Of course it is.
Interested during these years what is going on in Iraq, what is going on in Afghanistan. Have you been asking the United States and NATO whether they are certain of what they are doing?
Briefly with Russia's Foreign Minister Lavrov on the margins of our G20 meeting today. I urged Russia to reverse its irresponsible decision and return to implementing the new START treaty, which places verifiable limits on the nuclear arsenals of the United States and the Russian Federation.
Among other things, one of the outcomes we agreed on was that the listings of terrorists, the counter-terrorism side listings should not be politicized.
The future is so much in the Indo-Pacific. Our engagement throughout the region, both through the Quad and in other ways, even as we're rightly focused on what is happening in Ukraine as a result of the Russian aggression. Not just because it matters to Ukrainians and to Ukraine and to Europe, but because it matters to the entire world.
I welcome you to India for the G20 Foreign Ministers meeting.
Joining me now, Fred Weir, political analyst and Russian affairs expert. Joining me from Moscow, Achal Malhotra, former diplomat. Einar Tangent, political affairs commentator from Beijing. Edward P. Thomas, P. Joseph, my apologies, senior fellow in SAIS of Foreign Policy Institute, joining me from Washington. Let me begin with you, Fred. How do you see S. Jaishankar's admission that G20 members failed to arrive at a consensus on the Ukraine-Russia war, despite the Bali declaration, which had made a headway. Are special interests then pushing their way and looking to shrink space of members who may have their own strategic interests? Or would you be of the opinion that India has shown that it can get two opposing sides together to at least that will be seen as the first step towards a resolution?
Well, I think on the matter of the Ukraine war, it would have been impossible to bridge the divide between the Western countries and Russia back to China. It's no criticism of India that they failed to do that. They are irreconcilable. The issue here is the G20 a broader kind of forum? And yes, it is. There are a lot of other issues that it's meant to be entertaining, and I think the Indian chairmanship pushed the meeting in the direction of things like global development, the consequences of climate change, a lot of things. The thing that has come into clear focus during this meeting is that countries of the global south are not interested in getting dragged into this battle, this crusade of ideas between the West and Russia over Ukraine. They have other agendas and they want to be heard.
Anna Tanjun, do you think the West and Europe is being unreasonable with its position on the Russia-Ukraine war? On the one hand, it is pushing arms and supplies to Ukraine and at the same time wants sanctions on Russia while ensuring its energy security doesn't suffer, of which Russia is a massive supplier. It, however, expects other countries to follow up with stringent sanctions at the cost of its own energy security.
Yes, I think what they're doing is impractical. When war is on your doorstep, I think it's very hard to separate the emotional from the rational. And I think you can see that. But, you know, Europe is far from unified on this. A few days ago, there was whispers that there was going to be a proposal by the UK, France, and Germany to give Ukraine some encouragement to go to the table. But it's very difficult to see, and I agree with my colleague in Washington. The sides are diametrically opposed. It doesn't matter how sweet the music India played during this G20. The people were not ready to dance with each other, and particularly the U.S. has made it clear that they will back Ukraine. Ukraine is in a political position where they said that they won't give an inch, that there can be no talks unless the Russians leave all lands that are disputed. So at this juncture, it's going to take trust to get this whole process restarted. And I think in a multipolar world, it's going to take not just India, but many other BRICS nations, China, Brazil, Indonesia, Turkey, other countries to come together and try to say to these people that maybe you cannot trust each other, but you can trust us to be, worthy interlocutors, and we will help you arrange something. In the end, Russia has to have some sense that its security is intact. NATO has to stop expanding. Unless you get to those basic ideas, you cannot unite Ukraine, even under a very loose constitution as proposed in the two previous peace treaties, which unfortunately were apparently just ruses by the French and the Germans, as they have admitted. They had no intention of following through with the Minsk I and II peace plans.
Okay, Achal Malhotra, one thing is clear that India is at the center of both the G20, given its presidency, and also the ascending world order as well. And we saw what happened at the Quad. There was a joint statement. Is the West now seeing India as a counterweight to China in the region, or is it in line with how India sees itself? Because we have seen how India has really, maintained that independent line. Many would say tightrope war on the Ukraine-Russia war, and it has put its own interest ahead of playing someone else's game.
Well, Maria, first and foremost, the fact that the Americans and the Westerns and the Japanese decided to engage India is that they all consider India to be an important global player, if not leader, which can play an important role, a partner in Asia, Indo-Pacific. Whether it is to counter China, that may not be the only objective, but in the overall context, if you look at the graph, the India's ascendancy, India's, ability to make contribution towards resolving issues which are of global dimensions, its ability to identify and raise those issues, whether it is democratization of global, institutions of global governance, whether it is climate change, terrorism, name the issues, multilateralism, multipolarity. We have been taking a very firm and, proactive stand. We have views on it and we adhere to it, and we are trying to take everybody along with us. Our latest message from the G20 is that let's focus on issues which unite us and take some concrete steps towards resolution and arriving at a consensus, rather than get bogged down by issues which divide us. So India's importance is there. What is India? What India has done is that it has very, played a very, it has been very careful in not being seen as a part of any alliance. And it continues to put emphasis on partnerships. That's how we have a comprehensive global partnerships with the United States of America. We have a special and privileged partnership with Russia. We have many other strategic partnerships. We had one also with China, and we have really recently upscaled our relations even with also with Italy to make it a strategic partnership. Meaning we retain our global, our strategic autonomy, and yet we want to play, of course, an important role, and we want to be a part of the rule making rather than just sit and follow, are made to follow rules which are being framed by the others.
Okay.
And we want in the whole process the interests and priorities of the global south to be taken into account. It wasn't without any reason that we held a global south summit in the year we are holding the presidency, and the message again is clear that we are willing to take your issues and bridge the divide between the global north and the global south.
Yes, and also with the Quad meeting happening on the sidelines of G20 foreign ministers meet, Edward, is this meant to send a message to China and its allies that while G20 members may have a social and economic purpose, a smaller, more powerful coalition has territorial and military security imperative, which is a strong counterweight to Chinese expansionism?
I think you're absolutely right. It's a strong counterweight to Chinese expansionism. You're absolutely correct, and to Russian aggression here. And I have to, for your viewers, have to clarify and correct. There's complete distortion of the global reality that was presented by the first two speakers on this program. It's Russia and China that are isolated. There's no balance. There's no balance here whatsoever, including at the G20, which was so skillfully chaired by India. In fact, there's no balance here, some type of division. 17 out of 20, I repeat, 17 out of 20 of the G20 members signed and denounced signed the document that denounced in the strongest terms Russia's invasion and demanded a complete withdrawal from Ukrainian territory. That's 17 out of 20 of G20. And let's be clear here that we're not just talking about NATO members and the US and the European Union. No, we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the first of several UN General Assembly resolutions. I repeat, the UN General Assembly, the first one passed by a vote of 141 to 5. So anyone defending Russia needs to explain why only 5 countries disagreed and voted against that initial and several resolutions that followed that deplored in the strongest possible terms, that's a quote, Russian aggression. So there's no debate here about the facts. There's no division here between global South and the West. Everyone agrees this is unprovoked Russian aggression. The notion that there's some kind of parallel here or to anything that NATO has done is completely false. It's meant to fool countries like India, which of course are far too sophisticated. We see the great difference between India, which has diversified its economy, grown a very healthy and impressive IT sector, cooperates with the United States, Australia, and Japan against Chinese aggression, compared to Russia, which is a failed state, relies on fossil fuels that are destroying our and accelerating climate change. So there's simply no comparison here. We have to get the facts to your viewers straight. Russia is the one that's responsible for these rising food prices, the devastation in Ukraine, the attacks on civilians in Ukraine. There's no comparison here. There's no balance whatsoever. There's no comparison. And finally, let me point out, for example, this trope, completely false trope about NATO expansion. Here's the fact. The United States never wanted to expand NATO. That's a fact. The U.S. created something, a waiting room called Partnership for Peace. Bill Clinton never wanted to expand NATO. Why was NATO expanded? For one reason. The demand of the countries themselves, Hungary, then Czechoslovakia, Poland, that wanted to be part of the West and feared Russia. Why did they fear Russia? For the exact reasons you see on your television screens today. Okay. This savage bombardment, this unprovoked aggression against a peaceful neighbor, Ukraine, that simply wanted to join the European Union. Okay. And again, it wasn't even NATO. It was European Union membership that provoked Russian aggression in 2014 in Crimea, and this subsequent effort by a very weak leader, Vladimir Putin, who is ruining his own country, and including, and those who are in the know in Russia know he's destroying and killing
Fred, would you agree
Russian
with
troops who are untrained and unprepared
what Indian
and
Prime Minister said in his opening remarks, that it's multilateralism which is in crisis, and look at issues which can be resolved or points of convergences rather than issues which cannot be resolved, and that is the reason why we did not see a joint statement.
Well, yes, of course. It's not multilateralism. It is the insistence of a few big powers on their point of view and putting it front and center. I think we just got a good illustration of that. Global polling shows that majorities of the population, not just the governments, but population in countries like India, Turkey, South Africa, Brazil, do not regard Russia as an adversary. It's very clear that there is this divide between those powers that are clearly involved and see Ukraine as a central issue of our time and our moment, and everyone else. Trade patterns show the same thing. UN General Assembly resolutions are what they are, but the United States routinely ignores it when the UN General Assembly votes against their embargo on Cuba, routinely for decades. It is what it is, but Ukraine is a huge issue, and Russia is, caught in this. I myself don't support the Russian war, but the complexities of our moment, the global the split that's happening into a multipolar world, it's unfolding before us, and I wish Americans, I'm a Canadian, so when I say Americans, would come to terms with this and find a new language for addressing especially the global South.
Okay, Edward, before I give the final word to Aina Tanjin and Achal Malhotra, one thing that was achieved was that the foreign ministers of the Secretary of State and the foreign minister of Russia came face to face. There was a 10-minute encounter. Of course, there is different version of that encounter. There are versions that it was a pull aside. There are others who say it was an encounter, a chance meeting, but it lasted good 10 minutes.
Yes, and that was valuable. And Secretary of State Antony Blinken told Foreign Minister Lavrov very clearly the U.S. will stand by Ukraine along with its allies as long as it takes, and urged Russia to get back into START for control of nuclear weapons, something that should interest the entire world, and also asked for the release of the arrested and unfairly convicted Paul Whelan to be arrested. So yes, he had that opportunity to convey personally those messages to Lavrov, which was of some utility. But the wider message here for India, and which is so concerned about, and legitimately so, this threat from an aggressive China, is that it is China that is the number one backer of this Russian aggression. And UN General Assembly resolutions do count because we know there's no balance here. It's Russian aggression.
Okay.
And this war that devastates Ukraine and devastates the global economies, including India's, is over as soon as the world unifies against Russian aggression. Then we will see exactly fair-minded and good negotiations that will end with Russian aggression curtailed and will reduce these food prices and terrible inflation. The more the world is united against Russian aggression, the sooner this war ends and peace will prevail.
Okay,
please.
Yeah, my colleague seems to think that by repeating something loudly and making unfounded claims that somehow is a substitute for rationality. I mean, the previous Canadian speaker made it very clear what the statistics are. He's just spouting talk points from the State Department. The fact is the U.S. knew because Kiernan, Kissinger, Biden himself, and the current head of the CIA said if we go into Ukraine and we threaten Russian security, they will fight. So this idea that somehow this was unforeseen, who would have known that the Russians would have attacked, that's nonsense. And it's a real insult to people's intelligence to be just repeating this kind of nonsense.
You know, Achal Malhotra, the differences are out in the open, and we saw that play also on this debate. But the concerns are of India setting the agenda for a G20 because it's on the chair. So the question then is, you know, all that issues that India wants to be on the foreground, be it issues of energy security, food inflation, the rising debt of developing nations, all that, what happens to those issues? Because the war clearly is casting a long shadow on India's presidency.
No, there is absolutely no doubt. We had all anticipated it, and this was one of the biggest challenges that India had to face during its G20 presidency. And, you know, whatever has happened, it has been on the predicted lines. Even when Blinken-Lavrov meeting, you know, had there been some positive, constructive talk about bringing in peace, it would have been a meaningful interaction. But Blinken seemed to have gone with his memorandum of demands, which have already been aired by the United States of America many a times. Lavrov also repeated its own point of view. But you see, you're right that the issues, you know, the issues of global concerns, including of global South, food security, energy security, cyber security, multilateralism, multipolarity, digital divide, hundreds of other issues need to reform the global institutions, World Bank, IMF, UN Security Council, all are there on the table, and I don't think they are falling victim to this Russia-Ukraine conflict. Of course, it is having its shadow to the extent that foreign ministers, the finance ministers, meeting ended without a communique. But whatever they debated, whatever they agreed upon, was summarized. There is a document to refer to in the future. So to say that this conflict would wash away our presidency would be going too far. We are working towards bringing about consensus on the issues where we can agree about. There is always room for.
Let's see. Basically, the elephant in the room has been addressed repeatedly, and that elephant is definitely ensuring that the points of convergences are not really arrived at. Thank you so much for your time, Fred Wire, Achal Malhotra, Raina Tangent, and Edward P. Joseph. That's all from me. Thanks so much for watching.